Okay, I got the piston set up on the lathe here. I got it zeroed out both ways, and I got it chucked up here with a ring compressor. I forgot who it was, if it was Sean Carr or one of the other pros that was I saw using a ring compressor to hold the piston. So I think this should work. I haven't tried it with the plastic ring compressor, but if we go real light and we don't horse it, I think it would work. I think it should work really good. So what I'm trying to do is cut a tapered piston, but I want to cut into this pop-up. So I want to leave some of the pop-up. I'm going to cut some of the pop-up, but overall I'm going to cut about 50 thousandths off the crown at the thickest point, at the heaviest of the cut. All right, so I'm going to kiss it off here and find 0. Okay, now I have 0. Now what I can do to reset both these numbers at the same time, instead of pushing just 0, I can turn it off and turn it back on again. It'll zero out right there. But every time that I do that, it changes to millimeters. So I have to change it back to inches. And believe me, it was either the last build or the one before it. I didn't realize it was on millimeters. The good news is that you just won't cut enough. And you'll figure it out at some point that you're not cutting enough material. And then you'll switch it to millimeters, or you'll switch it to inches if that's your unit of measure that you want to use. Right there's 0. So Z-axis is how much we're going to be cutting, that bottom number. As we move that, we come back and forth off 0. So we're going to end up on the outside of this piston. I want to end up back to 50 thousandths. It'd be a negative 50 thousandths into the material. Remember, I got to stroke all the way in because I'm going to be cutting into that pop-up. There's the pop-up. We're about the same weight as the stock piston, but now we're pushing up extra 30 thou taper up into the center of the chamber. Okay, and then the last thing I got to do is cut maybe 15 thou out of that little flat spot on the outside of the chamber. I can cut that in at that 5-degree angle, so we can match that angle, and then cut into that 15 thou. That should set my squish right where I need it to be. But it won't be perfect because there's so many moving parts here. So whatever else, if I need to trim a little off the base to set the squish at the very end, I'm going to trim a little off the base. But I can't cut more than about 65 thousandths off of everything total, because remember, everything about the top half of this piston is taller than the 500i piston. So the rings, I'll show you. So the ring on the 660 piston is about 65 thousandths taller than on the 500 piston. So if you go and cut way too much material off of anything, out of the chamber and piston, and then you have to cut material off the base, now you're sending, once you start cutting material off the base, you're sending that ring even higher than 65 thousandths up into that chamber. So you know that you've got 120 thousandths stock on this crown height. So it's up to you to decide how far do you want to push this new higher ring height up into that, right? I mean, you can see where my new ring height on the 660 piston will be in comparison to the old squish band height on the 500 piston. So it's up to you. How high do you want to go? It is a steel cylinder, so it's got good plating. You go as high as you want. I'm only gonna raise it. I'd like to raise it about 65, maybe 70 thousandths higher than the stock ring height. You can push that as high as you want to go. 18 on the outside ring, and then we go to 21, 32, as our combustion chamber starts opening up. So that's exactly what we want. We want tight squish, tightest squish right on the outside, tapered up into that chamber. 18 is, I feel comfortable with 18 with no sealant. So once we put the 3 bond in there, I'm pretty confident we'll have 20. Okay guys, another weekend is upon me here. I got a nasty head cold. But we're ready to put this piston swapped 500i back together. I'm really just putting an emphasis on the piston because that's really the whole build. It's just, I had bigger ideas on, you know, we could do boost ports, we could do this, we could do that. This is, I kind of changed my mind on all that. I just want to see the 660 piston run in the 500i. This is version 1 of the 660 piston in a 500i swap. So everything else, any other future ideas are still on the table, but it's my first time doing it. I just want to put some really healthy work saw numbers in and see what the piston runs like, because we are changing a lot of dynamics. We're running a taller piston. We are increasing the compression ratio. So, you know, we are adding durations to all 3 ports from stock, just not a lot, just a little bit. And then we'll see how the saw runs and we'll go from there. So let's do a final weigh-in with the piston and look at a couple other things. All right, so here's where we started. Here's the stock 500i piston. We're at 89 grams. Then here's our modified 660 piston. We're at 83 grams. Okay, so we are 6 grams lighter than stock, and we are 10 grams lighter than where we started with this piston, because we started at 93 and now we're at 83. So, which really is irrelevant. All that matters is that we're 6 grams lighter than stock, which is significant to me. So, what's critical to mention about modifying the 660 piston to fit into this saw is that, you know, both skirt lengths need to be modified independently of each other. This is the intake side. It only has one specific length to run at 85 for an 85 intake with no gasket that I found. Maybe you have different findings. And then the exhaust side over here, we just want to make sure that we run that, you know, a good 50 thou from free porting or lifting up above the bottom of the exhaust port, and we are. I also had to go in with my Fordham and grind with a flat burr tool and grind the inside of the wrist pin slot. That needed to be clearanced to fit the 500i wrist pin. Then other than that, I just went in, cleaned up the windows, even though we're not really using the windows yet because we haven't put boost ports in yet. But I cleaned up the windows, cleaned up the casting on the skirts and on the bottom. And then And then, you know, the machine work, I put the 5-degree taper on, which we cut 50 thousandths from the crown. We cut 15 thousandths off the chamber. So 65 thousandths total. We are also running a 30 thousandths pop up in the center. So this piston is 95 thousandths. Well, I'm sorry. It's holy crap. We're also running a 30 thou pop up on the center, but some of that was taper cut out. So the whole idea here is just raising compression ratio, lightening the piston as much as I can, putting just some healthy port durations in, and seeing what we got, you know, seeing how the saw runs. The port work, it's nothing fancy. I'm not a professional. The port work is the same as it's just always going to be on my saws, because I'm not a professional engine builder. We've got the transfers at 118/120. We've got a 5-degree taper cut on matching the crown of the piston on the chamber. You know, the exhaust port's got a nice chamfer on it. All the exhaust and transfers have a nice chamfer. I didn't do anything to the lower transfer. Not that you shouldn't, but you know, there's a lot going on here. And you know, the big part of the lower transfer is down in the case. That's where we're scooping our air, right? So when we look at this part of the lower transfer and this part of the lower transfer, that's really mid duct. You know, that's really like mid flow, not mid, but that's a quarter of the way up on our way, you know, to get up here. So I'm not going to say that you couldn't make gains by radiusing this or, you know, opening this up somehow. But, you know, every time you do that, you're adding volume to the case, and maybe this could handle adding some volume to the case. Maybe not. For this version of the build, I'm not modifying that. So the intake port I didn't touch the intake port. I left it alone for now because I don't want to set the intake. I don't want to give the intake greater than 85, 170 degrees total, open and close. Right now, I'm going to run it at 170 first, see how it runs. And the exhaust port, just got a quick sand and polish as always. Height set at 100. Now on the case, here's the story with the case work. I did have to duct tape up the top of my case and do some grinding on this deflector. This deflector does exactly that. There's an incoming charge coming into the intake port right here, and it sends it where steel wants it to go. So it's some of it's gonna go to the sides, and some of it's gonna go up this ramp and up underneath the piston, which in my opinion is kind of important, okay? And on the 461, I've just taken this piece out because it's a removable part, and I have had the saws run. Now I also ran boost ports in that saw, and you know, I think there was plenty of piston cooling. Now one difference between the 461 and the 500 is that on the 461, we can adjust the carb. We can give it a little bit more fuel. We don't have to run it on the ragged edge of lean like this steel saw, like this 500i saw is gonna run with that electronic fuel management or that fuel injection. That computer is gonna make this thing run on the ragged edge of lean because it needs to meet those environmental regulations. That's just how they run. There is no adding more fuel. At least I don't know how to add more fuel on a 500i. So we can imagine, you know, here we are, mixture coming in.
You know, some of it's going to go up and get sent up and get shot up under the piston, and some of it's going to go and be diverted to the sides. And by modifying this, we're now probably adding a little bit more to the sides. A little bit more fuel, a little bit more air fuel is probably being let in. We're probably unrestricting it slightly by needing to modify that to accommodate the different piston. We're also adding a little bit of case capacity, or a little case volume. Not a ton, but we are adding a little bit of case volume, which is notable, but I don't think it's anything that's going to kill the build. Okay, and then last little bits of intel as I'm starting to assemble here. I put the this is a highway piston. I put this in with the highway wrist pin that came with it, because the 500i wrist pin is too long. It won't fit. So I put the highway wrist pin in, and I put the highway wrist pin clips in, which a lot of people don't like to run these clips that are shaped like this, or they clip these off, right? But what I look at is, well, how does it fit, you know? When you put that in there, how does it fit in there? And I can move this. Now it's not going to do it, but if I can move it like that easy, I'm not really pushing that hard on it. You know, it's not fitted very tight in there. I'm not running those wrist pin clips. You know, that's not fitting tight enough in there, and I've heard enough horror stories about this style pin clip to just not do it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna steal some Meteor clips from the 064 build, just because I have them on the bench here, and then we'll find some better clips to put into the 064. Okay, so I'm all glued up here. I went with MotoSeal. MotoSeal's a little bit thinner than some of the other products, than Durco. I think it's even thinner than, might be a little thinner than 3-Bond. So if you know that you have a good mating surface on your base, I have no problem with running MotoSeal, because it's a little thinner, and I feel like when you're running your transfers through your base on a quad loop or a front fed system, I feel like I would rather go with a thinner material that's not going to squeeze a big, heavy, thick bead into those transfers. And then one other point is, so the ring ends are facing the exhaust port on this build. Okay, so my ring end is right inside that side of that exhaust port. Now, I didn't widen this exhaust port at all because of that, because I want to get all the ring stability that I can. Okay, but I did raise my exhaust port, you know, to get to my 100 degrees from top dead center. In doing so, I increased the radius of the top of the exhaust port slightly, which should help, help RPM and peak power. And this is a single ring, just running the top ring here, not running the bottom ring. So even though I didn't widen it, I still feel like I can help this, and we're running a pretty modest 100 degree exhaust port, nothing extreme or racy on the exhaust port. But by increasing that radius, we should be able to help add some RPM and peak power that way as well. Oh.